Okay, I'm gonna try and wear glasses for this one. There'll be probably a reflection once again. I'm gonna try and repeat the Fleetwood Mac review, but I noticed that it reflected a little bit. So, I'm just gonna do it. What the fuck ever. Let's try and go through with it. Hey guys, thank you for tuning in to ChannelBK. My name is Brian. We're gonna finish out the second Classics Week with Linkin Park's sophomore album, Meteora. Linkin Park is an acclaimed nu metal and alternative rock and rap group. And this was an album that I kind of decided last minute to put into the fold for Classics Week. Not necessarily because I wouldn't have thought of Linkin Park that way, because Linkin Park is a very important part of sort of my past when it comes to discovering music, as well as just their older stuff just being so on point. Their debut album, Hybrid Theory, was just being a young kid listening to that, it was just, again, unlike anything I heard, and just the angst in it was great. And then obviously this album, and then I kind of followed what they did later down the road. I haven't unfortunately gotten to their last album yet. I've been kind of a little put off, not necessarily because it's going to be hard to listen to it. It's more of just, I've heard the sound of the record is disappointing for the band themselves, and obviously what I was kind of leading to with the whole, afraid to listen to it is, yes, with Chester Bennington's passing this past summer on my birthday too, so it was like, happy fucking birthday to me, so depressing. And when that happened, I think I legitimately, for one of the first times in my life, got so fucking heartbroken, like I was freaking out and all this sort of stuff. And I'm hoping that this review just doesn't end up being like a majority of me saying how important they are in my early musical discography life, nor am I going to try and jump around like I always do in these reviews, because I know a lot of the times I kind of start really well, I start jumping around on songs, and then I kind of mix and mash all the things I want to say, so I'm going to try and just go through this album straight away, so bear with me on that. But one of the things about this album in particular is, even though a lot of their albums down the road I still followed and I still enjoyed, and I thought they were at least doing interesting stuff, Chester's vocals were always one of the big selling points for me. I thought, everyone kind of talking about the fact that he had such a vulnerable voice, but it was also like full of pain, and there was so much edginess to it. It really makes sense. Chester's voice was unlike anything I've ever heard, and for a voice like that to leave this earth is one of the most heartbreaking things. So listening to this record again was like one of the weirdest experiences, mainly because it just feels so odd to not have him here anymore. And specifically on this record, I guess, I kind of go back to what I said with Yellow Card, which, this is the record that I probably enjoyed the most out of their whole discography, mainly because it was just so hard-hitting. It got straight to the point. Once again, I think this is one of their best albums lyrically. I think Chester sounds great on it. Mike Shinoda's verses are some of the best here too. I think this is kind of one of the few times where, as I grew older, I kind of was able to look at his verses on some stuff and kind of, be like, come on, Mike, or it's like, it fits what they're trying to do, but it's obviously not like these super hard bars. But specifically on this album, I think Mike and Chester play off of each other very well, and I think, you can kind of look at some of these lyrics and they may be a tad melodramatic or in that sort of vein, but I don't really think it's the case as much on this album. I think Hybrid Theory, when I go back to it, it still sounds a tad dated, and I'm not trying to say like you can't be a classic album if it is, but I feel like a lot of people are going to try and talk about that album, and I feel like this album was the one that I want to talk about, because at this point, this album wasn't just about saying how it's a classic, it's just more of saying this is my favorite album of theirs, and I just want to talk about it and celebrate his life and celebrate Linkin Park. We obviously get an intro, very, very short, and then we get to Don't Stay, which just immediately hits you in the face. I love the scratching on this, the hard guitars, the drums, everything is just rough and hits you in the face. It's somehow, like, one of the things about this album that throws me off is, like I said, it's so, like, punchy and in your face, but it has such a great hard edge to it. Like, I don't think I've heard that on many albums, because you sort of get one or the other, but this album's able to make it seem like so poppy and punchy, but it still doesn't lose that edge. Once it gets to sort of the bridge later on, the intensity just comes in. The sentiment of this song too apparently can kind of be said from the perspective of them leaving their old label. It can also be, perceived as like a woman or like a relationship, where it's sort of this whole idea of being in sort of this place and sort of having the other party or the other person changing you for the worse, and how you're just realizing it and how you just need to get out of the situation. And I thought the hook on this, again, like many hooks I'm probably going to discuss on this album, are just so great. They're so well written and so well performed. Then Somewhere I Belong, which, holy fucking shit, like, it didn't really hit me until after Chester's untimely passing, but re-listening to this song, sort of in a new mindset that I am as like listening to music and just being older, this to me is probably one of the top 5 best Linkin Park songs. I don't necessarily know like in lyrics and all that, but in terms of sound, this is one of the most well-produced and mixed tracks I fucking heard from the group. I think the guitars are chilling. I love the drums, the simplicity of them, and the bass line. Like, the bass line has this great just sort of mood and forward motion to it. Like, every time I listen to this track, like, the mood is so fucking perfect. I get chills every time I listen to this. Chester's sort of swooning vocals when Mike is rapping. Like, oh my gosh, I love this. Again, the sentiment is the same thing. He's trying to find something that he can't feel. It's unattainable. It's not real. And he's just trying to find a place to belong. Then we get to Line From You, which has sort of this weird, sort of trippy sample that plays throughout it. I think that's a great addition. Again, the sentiment of like the terrible, heartbreaking thing of like telling lies to somebody so they're the one that end up leaving you, and how like this whole idea of just like you being the worst part of them and just pushing them away. And it's like, again, like I think the writing on this record is just so well done, unlike I feel like maybe stuff later down the road, because I feel like there was still such an intensity in it, a very just hard vulnerability on this record that never, at least to me, felt like it was trying to kind of be like over the top. And again, like, even though I love Linkin Park, I do admit that later down the road, yes, it did get a little cheesy or over the top at points, but just listening to this record, I don't feel that because the record sounds so great. And then, like, the hook is so great on here, too. Like, I love Mike's, like, you know, no turning back now. Like, his, like, call response to Chester is great. They have a lot of great moments on here. Hit the Floor. Again, the hook. Call and response is great. I love it. I love sort of how hard-hitting it is and heavy this track is. But it has like a really cool hip-hop flair to it. That's a really nice touch. Easier to Run, which, yes, it's still a little hard-hitting, but it's moodier. I love how it's a little bit lighter. I love the way that it mixes these really interesting 808 drums, like kind of that sort of style, but with actual instrumentation. The simple sentiment of like, you know, it's easier to run than face your fears and all that. Verse 2 in specific is like very hard to look at now from what has happened to Chester, sort of this idea of how he never wants to move forward because there would be a past and how hard that would be, and just trying to let go and never looking back. Like, it's just, again, moments like this where once again you get through this album and then you get to something like this and you hear something like that and it makes you sort of sit back and be like, fuck, like, god damn. But then to kind of get us out of that mellow funk, we get to something like Faint, which is one of, you know, the best singles or, you know, tracks from here. Just a hard-hitting, heavy banger. It's just so in your face. I just love the intensity of this track. It's a great way to pick it back up. Again, the flow of this album, even though it kind of goes from one mood to the other, I think it definitely hits you when you need it. Faint 09, once again, I love the drums on here. There's a great mixture of electronic, especially industrial drums that are sort of laced throughout this track and I think work well with the instrumentation. And then again, just Chester's, you know, just howling vocals in the hook. You become a part of me. It's absolutely infectious, just infectious. I can't separate. Breaking the Habit, you know, obviously looking now at their whole discography reminds me a lot of like what they ended up doing on 1,000 Suns. It's very electronic. Again, there's still some hard hittingness to it, and again, sentiment is very clear. Breaking the habit, it's the idea of drug addiction. It's the idea of kind of trying to let go, and then even when you let go, it feels kind of weird because, you know, having that addiction, that's what you want. It's very great, and again, it's obviously clear to go back and understand why Chester had a hard time maybe playing this song or performing this song, but again, like, I feel like his personal perspective sort of inside the song with his vocals is truly great. From the Inside is once again another somber track. There's such great chilling pianos on here. I think the 6/8 time signature is also really great too. And then we get to something like Nobody's Listening, which, okay, so this track could have been so dated. It could have been so odd. But this is probably one of the first times where, yes, I understand. There is different tones and tempos throughout this whole album. This is the first time I feel like we get a song that feels completely different from the general place of this album. But I think it still fits. The Japanese bamboo flute sample is great. I think the scratching is sick. I think this has obviously a more hip-hop sort of flavor. Something that's kind of like hit the floor, but obviously this has more of kind of a more interesting vibe to it. Again, it could have easily been so bad to listen to this track again, but I think it works. Like, I think this track works really well. I think it fits with the album, and I definitely think this is sort of like a nice change of pace from most of the stuff we kind of got to. Session is an instrumental, which leads us into the, you know, iconic Numb with its iconic hook. The idea of not wanting to become someone that you want to become and being afraid of that. You know, I still think the haunting somberness of this track is great, but again, there's an upliftingness to it as well. And that is sort of the best way to end this album. I was very glad to sort of revisit this album, and I was very happy to sort of have an album like this be in my Classics Week. I wish it didn't take me to something that fucking depressing to sort of have it be in my mind, because I always would have wanted to do an album of theirs, because again, they have such an important place in my past. And specifically this album, and coming back to it and still being in sort of this mindset now as an adult and, you know, all that, I am able to at least look at this album a little bit with a different kind of lens. But even when I do, it still throws me off, because I fucking think this is still a phenomenal album. I think the writing is great. I think Mike Shinoda's verses are great. I love the instrumentation. I love the experimentation. I think once they hit Hybrid Theory, they kind of had this rough sound, and then they went with a punchiness on this album. I think it works beautifully. I love where they go with it. I think, once again, this is such a great flow of an album, and I definitely think that this is one of their highlights. And once again, I think at this point, this album sort of defined them and sort of broke them out, because obviously once they got to something like Minutes to Midnight, you know, they kind of, I felt like, started pleasing a little too many people, which I understand. But I think this was sort of the album that, even though, you know, they have their diamond Hybrid Theory, I think this album of theirs is my personal favorite and will always be a personal favorite. So, but with that being said, hopefully you guys listen to this album. If you have, leave your comments about it below. Favorite tracks, you know, blah, 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 all that sort of stuff. If you haven't, please go listen to it and please tell me what you think. If you like, please subscribe. You can check the rest of my Classics reviews out. Lists from the end of this year, other old videos, other videos from this year, all that sort of stuff. Thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you for joining me for another Classics Week. I love giving them to you guys. I'll see you guys in the new year, even though probably there'll be one more video coming out at this point. So this isn't the last video for the year. I think the new video will be in the new year. But anyways, semantics aside, thank you once again for tuning in to ChannelBK. Peace out, guys. Rest in peace, Chester. You're always in our hearts.